We have to encourage young people not to participate in that erasure by ignoring the advice of elders.
Oh, that's the cover quote now.
If you can create a safer space, I think there's something worthy in that type of bubble as incubator. These issues still matter. Always key both to think about where we've been and where we're going.
Hi, I'm Jim Fielding. Welcome to Ask for an Answer. Hello, kind, curious, and talented human beings. It is time for another episode of Ask for an Answer with Jim Fielding. I am so excited about this episode. I'm going to have my guest introduce himself in a moment. But this is what I'm calling the Pride series. So I have hand-selected a set of 5 guests for Pride Month 2026, which will all be distributed in June of 2026. We're recording this at the end of May, post Memorial Day. That doesn't really matter to anybody, but I like that for my own records. So I am so excited to welcome my guest. I'm going to ask John to introduce himself and give a brief bio, and then we're going to dive in.
Thank you, Jim. It's so great to be here. I am John B. Weinstein. I am currently the Provost of Bard Academy and Simon's Rock at Bard College, which is, I like to think, is the nation's best early college, and the high school program that leads into that. We are also the home of the Bard Queer Leadership Project, which I founded in 2023 at Simon's Rock, which helps young queer leaders find their passions and their leadership journeys. And I have been a college campus leader, college dean, public high school principal, independent school head, college professor, and high school teacher within my 25-year career as an educator.
I was going to say, this man values education. So I love this because you know how much I value education. And I'm going to tell our listeners and viewers how we met. And I love that it was 2023 that the QLP launched, because we connected in 2023 early on when you saw that I had a book coming out, All Pride, No Ego, which is behind my head there, and asked me to come and speak to your students. And it turned out to be such an amazing event, John, for a couple of reasons. Number one, you connected me and Skylar Baylor, who has turned out to be a friend and a peer and a fellow author. He and I got in a car in Boston and drove to your then campus in Western Massachusetts. So it was like 3 hours of forced conversation, which was so easy and delightful. Then not only did you put on an incredible event with you as the moderator and our chance to really meet the students, you opened your home, you and your husband opened your home to me. It literally was one of my favorite events of the entire book tour. And I spent that whole time, you know this, I spent that whole time kind of in shock, because I was talking to students who were majoring and studying queer leadership, and openly and honestly and authentically. And then when I found out your resume and the fact that you had done high school, private school, college, deanship, and the whole bit, and navigated it as authentically you, telling your story the whole time. I mean, I just knew that we would be friends, and I'm so happy that we're connected professionally and personally now. It's great. And I've been wanting to have this conversation on the podcast for so long, but I held it for Pride Month. So here we are. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride, and excited to do this in Pride Month.
Yes. And I think that's what I'll start is, sitting here in 2026, I'll ask like the cliche question, but what does Pride Month mean to you, and why do you think it's important for our community? I'll just start with that question.
Yep. I think it's important because these issues still matter, right? I might think, okay, certainly 25 years ago when I first started as an educator, but even, if we go past that when I was a student in school, yes, we can say things are so much better, which they are. This is a key point I like to make with young people. I do have students who, I know where this is coming from. This comes from some of the climate change discourse, where they'll say that we've made the world much worse for them, which there's some truth to that. I do take issue when students tell me that we've made the world much worse for them as LGBTQ young people, and it's so much worse than what we had. Like, okay, I got to disrupt that one because that's super not true. It's not that it's perfect in every way right now, but when I was growing up and in school, I imagine for you as well, Jim, because we're roughly contemporaries, there were not any openly queer school leaders in any of those categories that I've described. Not even really many teachers in any way. So I do think that it is a lot better, right? We still have places that we want to go and ways that we want to move up. But I think with Pride Month, it's always key both to think about kind of where we've been and where we're going. I do like how Pride connects us to the past. If we think about the origins of Pride, certainly on my podcast, which I was so thrilled to have Jim on, has also had a guest, Mark Siegel, pioneer from the Stonewall era. So this past is really important, but then we also want to think about the future. So I think that Pride Month really enables us to do both of those things at the same time. It can be simultaneously true that my students want something better than what there is now, but that it can be better than what it once was. Those don't have to be in conflict with each other.
No, I think it's brilliant. And I think what you and I bonded over is that's exactly the way I think of Pride Month, is the look back and honor and respect the past and talk about what we can learn from the past. Be honest about where we are in the present, for sure. I mean, there's positives and negatives as any other time we've gone through, and then talk about the future. And what I love about being associated with you and watching the work you do, what I felt when I was on campus with you, when I was with your students, when I was with your faculty, you guys are helping create the future like that. And I left there thinking, how different would my path have been if, not even if I could have majored or studied or got a certificate like you have in queer leadership, but even just been honest about it when I was in college, right? I mean, it's not even if the course was available or not. It wasn't in 1983 when I went to college. It's also if I would have even taken the course, if it was accessible, because of my inability to really embrace who I was. So I think accessibility is one thing, but then actually taking advantage of what's offered to you is another thing. And that was the thing when we had dinner with your students that blew me away, is people who had intentionally found your program and found your campus through searching social media and searching on the internet, right? And because they were looking for a place where they would be physically and psychologically safe, but also where they were going to learn about queer leadership and living and navigating in the world as an out and proud member of the LGBTQ plus community. And again, not accessible to us. I mean, 25 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it wasn't accessible. I mean, this is a phenomenon in the last, what you've built has really been, as you said, you launched it in 2023, but you spent your whole career, I'm not wrong, right? You were out your entire career, or did you start your career, like the early jobs, were you closeted or?
I definitely started out, and I remember, in my early teaching days, actually mentioning, at the time, I guess we would have still been boyfriend because Brian and I married in 2005. We were relatively early adopters, not quite as early as some of our Massachusetts neighbors. So I definitely was out as a teacher. I will say that when I became a school leader, it was a bit of a mix. I mean, my first school leadership gig was at the amazing Bard High School Early College Newark, which is a school that is still going strong. I didn't know in that world of urban school startup that most schools don't last. We started in 2011. We're still going strong. So that's been amazing. There, I felt like I was kind of out with my adult colleagues. I didn't feel like I was out with my students,
right?
Which I felt some degree of discomfort with. I mean, I wasn't really sure. I was in my first leader role. I was in a new city. It was very culturally different, and I wasn't certain. Something that did happen and I think I've shared this story with you, Jim, but we'll share it for our listeners.
Yeah, for sure.
I went back after feeling a bit of this like regret of being kind of a somewhat closeted high school principal.
Right.
I taught a course the next year when my successor, the amazing Carla Stevens, who's my co-host for Podcast Leading Queer and is the director of the Bard Queer Leadership Project. I taught a class there, and we were studying theater. We were reading The Laramie Project as one of the texts, and I talked about having attended Matthew Shepard's political funeral in New York City, and a really formative event for me. And after I talked about that, one of the students kind of raised their hand in the queue, in the class discussion and said, "So was that experience what led you to be so out when you were our principal?"
And you thought you were not out. Yes, I remember this.
And I sort of thought, news to me was, one, you all thought I was out, because I felt like I really wasn't. So, I think maybe the students know more than one thinks, or
out of the mouths of babes. I mean, the young people. Yeah. But I was
modeling better than I had thought.
You were more representative. You were more visible. But I wanted to ask you, because I think this is so important for our listeners, because I get asked this a lot, because I started my corporate career in the closet for sure. So when you made that conscious decision, when you became principal there, was it you weren't sharing personal stories? Were you changing pronouns? Were you just very businesslike? Like, what made you think, it's funny that the students said that, ironic, but what made you think that you weren't out versus how you are now? Was it not talking about your partner, your boyfriend?
I think definitely that. I think there was this sort of part where there would be certain questions, because high school kids ask you all sorts of personal things, right? College students do too, but certainly in having worked in this early college space that's kind of in between, I'm usually with high school age students, and I've had to prepare many a college professor with, they're going to ask you a detailed question about material, then say they don't like your shoes, and then ask you if you have any pets, right? And this just all kind of goes back and forth, and this is normal interaction with teenagers. And I said, you need to you can decide how much of your personal life you share, but you're going to have to come up with something, right? You can't be nothing, because you do need to connect with your students, and that's a key way to do it. So I didn't include my husband in that and with the students. I wasn't too often asked about my wife, though that would sort of come up. Like the students often sort of tried to guess, I guess. Brought a really good friend to prom, and students, I think, perceived her as my wife, or some did. So I think I was kind of doing that, not correcting. That's definitely something that we do when we're not kind of fully who we are.
Yeah.
It didn't come up that much. Like, it wasn't a constant piece. And I think that kind of two pieces. One, I think the worry about this was definitely much more in my head than in reality, because as we can see,
trauma.
This, the students, I think, did think I was out. So it was sort of me and myself. I think some of it, again, was, I hadn't made that a key part of it. And I think that may have felt like I didn't want to make the school all about myself.
Yeah.
There was a lot that was involved in that kind of leadership project already. I think when I came back to Simon's Rock, where I had been an out professor and was determined to be a very out leader, and I think in response to the Newark experience, like that was great, but my husband wasn't part of it either. Yeah, sort of in proximity, because he was still living back in the Berkshires and I was commuting, but then also just spiritually, I didn't talk about him a lot there. Yeah. We were determined to be the school leader, the kind of president-like role, even though my position was provost, but kind of functioned as the campus leader in a lot of presidential ways. We wanted that first gentleman role for him. We were really determined to be that couple at Simon's Rock. And I was determined to lead in all of my full authenticity in that role. And that was part of the purpose of taking that role and one of the goals there. Now, again, to be fair to myself, because I don't want to put pressure on queer leaders to be everything all at once.
Yes.
I was also going into Simon's Rock, having now already been a school leader because I'd had the Newark gig as my first school role. So there was more confidence even outside of queerness.
So
I was ready to add that other layer.
What year was that? What year? This is after New Jersey Principal. What year?
Yeah, I came back in 2020, in the auspicious summer of 2020, when we were all so wonderfully masked.
I was like, I was going to say, you came back in distance learning. Okay. Yeah, because I'm trying to, so 2020. Yeah, but I think it's so interesting because you make so many really important, like you're dropping pearls of wisdom everywhere, John, is first off, and I say this often in my talks, I think you and I even talked about this when we were together. It is a personal choice for anybody who's navigating this life. Like you and I both have the fundamental privilege of being white men. For people who are listening and can't see us, we're both white men. And so we have a certain amount of privilege that moves with that. And until we choose to share our story and, quote, marginalize ourselves, like we can play the game. And we've all done it. I got to the point similar to where you got. First job in my career, no, completely closeted and playing double life. But then made the decision, no, I was not ever going to do that. And then once my next job, I interviewed and, came on board and onboarded and everything as an out gay man. I always say to people, particularly in mixed audiences, I always say that doesn't mean I showed up like for orientation with my rainbow flag, but it just meant that I was me from day one and I didn't change pronouns. And my partner at the time was part of any activity associated with that company, right? So if there was a holiday party or a summer picnic or whatever, I mean, we attended that as a couple. And that was a conscious decision I made. And then once I did that, I always say, and that happened to be the Gap, I always say the Gap got the best version of me because I wasn't having to think about all that stuff we're talking about in the background. I just was me and I just moved through life. And I think it made me a more productive employee and a more productive team member. I think my relationships were more honest and authentic. I think, and honestly, longer lasting. I mean, I'm still friends with a lot of those people that I worked with at the Gap starting in, 1989, 1990, which is kind of funny. Whereas from my first job, I'm not in touch with anybody from that first role. So interesting, right? I respect them. I had some amazing bosses. I don't even think I'm linked in with people from that first role. It's almost like that part of my resume and that part of my life was like a bubble or something.
I had a bit of that in a different leadership role I had. I'm a Chinese language teacher by training.
Yeah.
And
I love that part. Yeah, you left that part out.
The early years of the advanced placement Chinese language and culture exam, I signed up to be kind of on the scoring team of that. And because I wanted to see what it was going to be like, how it might affect what came down the pipeline for college Chinese language. So in the process, for most of those years, we were out in Kansas City because you do this in a giant convention center. So we're in the United States. I'm in a world where I was the first non-native speaker of Chinese to hold the role of scoring leader, which is a fancy way of saying kind of token white guy.
Yeah,
right?
Completely.
And I was in this alternative world that was sort of Chinese culture, but within the United States. Mm-hmm. And there, it was like going to a land of no gaydar. So I'm getting tons of questions. And there is a position that the white speaker of Chinese occupies in Chinese culture. Like, people try to set you up with their daughters and so forth. I mean, there's a lot of matchmaking that starts to go on.
Yeah.
And there I would get lots of questions about my wife. And there we don't have pronouns in Chinese because, the pronouns are the same sound for male and female. But I was definitely sort of doing this code switch in gender and in language and in being. And in that setting, it just felt too complicated to go there. So I didn't. But that definitely made me resent aspects of that activity And it's that thing where you don't tell someone something about yourself because you think they're not going to be able to handle it. And then you resent them for not knowing, even though you actually did the action that did that. Again, there might be reasons why you're doing it. So that was kind of a space where it was a really fascinating experience. It was great for my Chinese. It felt very important for me that there was someone in that space who was a non-native speaker. And it was also, to experience that type of subalternity in a different setting was fascinating.
But
it definitely wasn't a queer leadership moment for me.
No. But I think in a weird way it was. I'm gonna share with you why, because I want to talk about code switching, because I think I love that you brought that up. Because you're so wise and you're so experienced. I think the point you made about it was almost like too much for the circumstances, right? And I will say, similarly, I am not a Chinese speaker. However, I did business in Hong Kong and mainland China for many years, especially at Disney and at Claire's. And I was very conscious, as you know, John, for those of our listeners and viewers who don't know, there's a lot of ceremony in doing business in mainland China and Hong Kong. And it usually involves dinner. You know this, John, a very large dinner with the lazy Susan in the middle and very special dishes. And you're the honored guest, and the honored guest eats first. And one of the things I love about Disney is before they ever sent us anywhere in Asia, they put us through cultural sensitivity training. Because obviously the way we do business in America versus how you do business in Hong Kong or Shanghai or Beijing was very different. And in those cases, I completely code switched, where I was basically just mum on anything to do with my personal life. And again, I wasn't trying to fake them out. I just thought this is too much. And I had the disadvantage, not being a native speaker, is I was working through translator, right? So I needed the translator, him or her, to get very clear for me what I was trying to accomplish at that dinner and not muddy the water. I also was very conscious at those dinners, because alcohol is usually involved at that dinner, that I did not over imbibe, because loose lips sink ships. But what my feeling is I would get back to the hotel after one of those important dinners. And we were dealing with government officials, regional governments, because we were trying to get licenses to open Disney stores. I would have to go back. I would immediately have to leave there, go back to the hotel and be completely isolated, go into my introvert mode, usually have to take a hot shower and basically cleanse, because it was hard and I was tired. I was so tired, because I always thought of it almost, and you and I have this theater thing in our background too. I almost thought of it as like I was playing a part. I mean, that was Jim, the president of Disney Store, who was trying to get a license to open Disney stores from the Beijing government or the Shanghai regional government. And I knew my part. I knew my expectation, and my personal needs or my personal truths or my quote, living authentically. And that literally, and I say to people, we talk about this with younger people, that was literally a code I switched on my arm. I think my code is right here. And I literally switched it to the most hetero version of Jim. I don't regret it. I don't think I did anything wrong, because I was there representing Disney. I was there representing Claire's. I was not there representing Jim. And I think that's part of what you're saying too, and I knew culturally it would have been just too complicated, but it doesn't mean it was easy. I think that's the point I'm trying to make for the listeners and viewers. It was tiring. It was draining.
Yeah. Well, and that's the piece where we're never going to lead as well when we're not being authentic. For the sole reason that some percentage of your brain power is going to something other than the meeting.
100%. 100%. And I think I also always, before those meetings, John, looked at who else was attending those meetings, and one of the things I loved about Disney and Claire's is we had people that were based on the ground in Shanghai and Beijing, usually native. And I would basically, even though I was, quote, the highest ranking person in the meeting, I would take a subservient role to them and let them run the meeting because I really wanted the spotlight on them. I always said it was more about them being able to talk directly and not have to go through the translator. I was trying to be, but it was also my way. It was my way of showing respect, honestly, to the other, quote, other side of the table and the other people at the dinner. But it was also my way of being like just that one more step removed on the code switch, for sure. Where we had this in Disney and in Claire's, we had amazing Chinese, native Hong Kongese, native Shanghaiese leaders, many of them who had been educated in the States, like got their MBA in the States or in the UK, and then had come back to, run businesses there. And honestly, were more equipped for that meeting than I was, frankly, even though I had the title. But in China, title matters, right? And so they were always very aware. But my part of that, in a kind of funny way, was like I ate the fish cheeks, right? When they would slide the fish, yes, right, or the however year old egg they would give me, the stinky.
Right. That's a very important piece. But there is, the drinking even is very gendered.
Very.
I can't drink huge capacities, and I certainly can't drink huge capacities of baijiu, which is the grain alcohol.
Yes.
So I would tend to I would protest a lot, and eventually they would let me drink wine, which was really, in a way, was gendering me female because the women are drinking wine.
Yes.
So at one point, I sort of a male colleague did the baijiu drinking, and I sat there and drank wine with the women, and it all kind of worked out. But it is a very gendered space.
It is.
And I think that if you think about career trajectory, I've never really had a lot of, time consecutively in China. I've never lived and worked in China. That was always kind of a layer that was just going to be harder to do. I wasn't sure I wanted to meld that with my queer identity, though I know people who have. So it certainly can be done.
I know people who have too, but it's not easy. And I also think, also to your point, like at the end of the dinner when like the cognac would come out or the cigars, right? Again, very gendered. And I knew how to pace myself for that. But again, I think it's especially important, especially for you, because you influence so many young people's lives. And I spend a lot of time on college campuses too. Again, I don't think that's being inauthentic. I often have to explain this. I don't think it's being inauthentic. I think it's code switching and it's being wise, and in that there's a time and a place for everything, right? And I don't. Sometimes young people will challenge me, and I like when they challenge me, and we can have an open conversation like this. And I'll say, be careful of passing judgment until you have the shoes on and you're sitting in the room, right? Because it's not as easy as it sounds. And I also, like you were in charge of a high school, you were in charge of a university, of a college. I was in charge of a lot of people's lives that were depending on me, and getting those negotiations right, getting those contracts right, wasn't just about me, it was about our entire team. And if that meant, again, playing a role, then I played the role.
Well, and I think about my kind of position as a queer leadership educator in this. I'm not there to model myself as the way for students to be.
Right.
I'm actually teaching them to be a kind of leader I have yet to become and may never get to be. And I would like them to exceed, right? We've got that Chinese saying that indigo is deeper than blue. Basically, the teacher exceeds the student. I want my students to, build on a base that I was able to help establish for them. Yeah. Right. But for them to go further and to push further, it's not a status quo project. Right? The Bard Crew Leadership Project is about pushing things further. So yes, I would love it if 20 years from now, one of my students is in a leadership role in a way that I never was. or never could have
Yeah,
been.
hopefully,
Always
to your point, hopefully we're making it possible. So let's shift gears to that, because you go back to Bard, where you had been a professor in 2020 with your husband. He's going to serve as first gentleman. But give us the history of where, did you go back in 2020 and know that the QLP was, like it was an idea you had in your head, or did QLP happen when you got back there? I'm not sure. I don't know that part.
I definitely didn't have the idea for it yet, because I remember I was thinking about kind of what to do with our situation, because we had a beautiful campus that just didn't have enough enrollment to support it, right? And
Stunning
then
campus.
this fall, we moved to a smaller campus adjacent to the Bard campus here in Barrytown, New York, where we are. So Simon's Rock is alive and well in a different location.
Right.
One of the things I was trying to do at that time was think about how can we have enough kinds of enrollment to actually stay in our home campus, right? This one we were at now wasn't really a thought then at the time. And I actually remember looking out from the window of my house, and as you said, you've been to my house. And I looked across at a space that didn't have a building and kind of envisioned this giant building there and thought, we could build the first queer college in America here.
I remember you. I remember that. Yeah.
And that, combined with our early college program and our high school program in preparation for early college program, will give us 3 programs, not 2. Maybe that will be an enrollment solution for us. So, I mean, it was a combination of my own passion for queer leadership and kind of a pragmatic solution that might work. We ended up going in a different direction, so that isn't what happened. But that's where it came from. So I certainly hadn't thought of it when I got there. It emerged out of that. But I was also aware of Simon's Rock for many years having a very high LGBTQ plus population. And I was talking about BQLP, and I would say to alumni, we think the school right now is 30 to 40% queer. They said, wow, it's gone down? So that's where I started to shift to 30 to 60. I mean, what that means is different, in different years since our origin in 1966. And how people identify kind of changes. But there, I knew that there had been a significant population, which made sense, right? Because at Simon's Rock, students, our traditional, non-traditional pathway has been that students leave high school after 10th or 11th grade to just go directly into college, and they don't even finish high school. We've added some other pieces since then, with our Bard Academy program, where you could also do high school. But most students leave high school and come to Simon's Rock. Now, if you think about it, certainly in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even 2000s, even now, what might be a reason why a student who otherwise is successful in school might really want to get out of the school they're in?
Totally.
So it's not surprising that even when it wasn't something that was spoken about as much, that young people would kind of leave to go to this place, and they would be able to find out the vibe even before social media.
Yeah, they would go, totally. They would gravitate towards it.
A way to sort of, or they'd go and visit and realize, again, which is not to say that everyone was queer, right? Still, in most cases, the majority were not. But there was a sense of kind of queer friendliness. So I knew that we had the right kind of population and legacy. Again, if I shared with alumni this is a project, many alumni would say that makes perfect sense with the direction the school has been. So I think that's, there certainly were factors where coming up with that idea made sense.
And I think having met your students and stayed in touch, now, like, since I've been there, many of them have stayed in touch with me and we email and stuff. You were also teaching allyship. I mean, because not everybody I met was a queer student. But they were allies. And I think that's wonderful, because you were teaching tolerance, and you were teaching, the glories of diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging and all those words. Some of the words we're not supposed to use right now. But I mean, I think when you're from a marginalized community, and I think this applies, I'm not speaking for any other marginalized community, because my marginalized community is LGBTQ. I'm not speaking for any other one. But that concept of safe, physical and psychological safety, is really a huge driver for us. And had I been exposed to Bard when I was in high school struggling with my truth and my story, I might have been a candidate to do exactly what you were talking about. And I asked my parents, I went to a large public high school in Toledo, Ohio. I had some amazing teachers, including a teacher who definitely knew my truth and was a mentor and a guide for me. But a large public high school in Toledo, Ohio in the 70s and early 80s was not equipped for my needs. There were not resources for my needs. There was in Toledo, Ohio, a private school. It was called Maumee Valley Country Day School for any of my listeners or viewers from Toledo. And we did a student council exchange with them. I was on the student council and I came home and asked my parents that I wanted to go there. And that's when I was a sophomore. It's funny when you're talking about the time. I said, I want to leave Whitmer High School, my big public high school, and I want to go to Maumee Valley Country Day. I, of course, said it was because it was a better college preparatory education, but it was because the one day we had done that exchange, I looked around and felt and saw people that I thought were like me. Without even having a conversation, I felt community there. It didn't happen because my dad said he wasn't paying for high school, which I understand. It was, the 70s. But so I get what you're saying with your the early program, because when you're 14, 15, you know yourself a lot. You know what's going on in your brain and you're searching for community. We all are. So it starts. Your first classes came in 2023, right? Because it was right when I came. They had just got. When did the first students start?
So we started with the vision forums. I mean, we had courses that went, into your history and culture. So it was a bit of a slide in, right, in terms of the launch, because we started by inviting speakers and the vision forum, and then we started the podcast. So it's evolved kind of over that time, I would say.
Yeah.
And this year we actually went, this year Carla is teaching at the Bard micro colleges, which are fantastic adult degree completion programs. So her students are actually non-traditional, kind of in the other direction. And so we did the queer leadership colloquium with Simon's Rock students and with Bard micro college students. So we had a very wide age span. It was actually better. I think the discussions between generations are a really key piece in queer leadership. And we actually feel like the project is going to be better for tapping into some of the wider range of ages that we have across the Bard network.
So the micro college, that's people who are returning to college who didn't finish their degree, or so older. Yes. I mean, I don't want to say older, but older.
Right. They're older, so a lot of 20s and 30s.
Right. They've been out in the world. They've been out in the world doing something else, and now they're coming back. And is that full time? Is that full time or part time? Are they back full time?
I wish we had Carla here to answer that question.
No, that's fine.
It can be either, but it's usually part time, I believe, because of what the students need to.
Right, because they're working. Yeah, because that's
to do. They're working.
I love that.
And that was really. It was exciting to actually take the same material and work with older students. And even within that, I mean, there were students for whom that was their first experience of getting to really express their queerness in any really visible way and talk about this.
Now you're getting me emotional. I always get emotional when I talk to you. I'm like,
it was really amazing to get to hear what people would talk about. And again, how sometimes the issues were different across generations, sometimes they were the same, but the discussion was so enriched. So I do feel like that's going to be the next direction of this work. It is important to provide that space for young people, but it's really the different generations in conversation with each other. And again, I think intergenerational support has been a key aspect of the queer community. That's less in vogue. And there's reasons why people sort of put some problematicness on it, which I think, is a whole other topic to sort of go into. But we do have to address the reality that most queer people don't have mentors who are older from within their own family. So that needs to be found somewhere. Right.
100%.
And
I think
so
that gets
something like the BQLP can provide that space. I think that's a great safe space to do that.
Yeah, no, I think you're touching on a really important topic. I mean, of intergenerational mentorship. You're talking about chosen family, why chosen family is so important in our community. And it's interesting because one of the questions, John, I get asked still on the tour, because I'm still out, with the book tour, there's 10 lessons in the book. And people ask, like, what was lesson 11 or what lessons ended up on the cutting room floor? And I say so often, and I think, being with you and being on campus, I think lesson 11 would have been something around intergenerational mentoring or the importance of intergenerational learning and intergenerational community for everything that you're saying. And I think when I write, the next book is not the sequel to All Pride, No Ego. I have a book coming out in April 27 that's more of a leader, like a leadership practice and style book. But when I write the sequel to All Pride, No Ego, which I will, that is going to be one of the lessons. So you and I will definitely talk about that because you guys are living it every day. And I know for me, and you did it in the speaker series that we did because you put me and Skylar together. And let's face it, I'm old enough to be, I think I'm older than Skylar's parents. And what I learned from Skylar, what I know Skylar learned from me in that event, but also in our subsequent friendship and relationship since then, is exactly what you're talking about. I think it's so important for our community and goes back to also learning and honoring the heritage and history of our community, right? You learn that from actually spending time with people that were there or who, like I end up talking a lot about living in San Francisco during the AIDS crisis because I was there, like it's first person account. Not that I'm an expert on it at all, but I mean, I can talk about my stories from that time.
Well, and some portion of that discussion between generations is how we build and maintain our own history.
Yes.
There are so many forces that are out there to erase our history. We have to encourage young people not to participate in that erasure by ignoring the advice of elders.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's it. That's the cover quote now. I mean, do not participate in the eraser.
So
okay, that's okay. By the way, I've got my bag. I've got my
excellent. You got your pride sampling.
That is, I've got the pride sampling. But I think, that is wisdom. I'm going to make sure we pull that quote. But so tell me, when you made the move to the new campus for economic reasons and all the other thing. Also, let's just have the honest conversation. What has it been like in this environment that we're in 2026 since this administration, the pressure on higher education? It's well documented everywhere, but what has the impact been specifically on your school, on your programs of, I'm just going to call it the current administration, the current Department of Education and all of that stuff?
I mean, I think for us, we've always been a bit of a bubble. And while the Simons Rock bubble, whether it was in Great Barrington or now here in Barrytown, New York, bubbles are good and bad.
Right.
In COVID and in this political climate, I'm leaning more into the good parts of bubbles, not because we can shut out the world forever,
right?
But if you can create a safer space for young people to get to develop and find their voice and then be ready to battle that world, I think there's something worthy in that type of kind of bubble as incubator, let's say.
That's nice.
For me, the ways in which the political situation is challenging for the school, this really gets into the nuts and bolts or even the weeds, say, of education. So, things like specific policies that make it hard for certain students, particularly international students, to pursue a program can really disrupt our enrollment and economic model, in a lot of ways. So it's a lot of the details. I mean, I think I learned this certainly in Newark. Public rules affect education, whether it's public or private, in these very detailed ways, some of which are foreseen and some of which are unforeseen. I do think the desire to challenge higher ed is certainly part of the current political goals of the present administration. So is by design, but it's often, it's the detail that makes the larger task you're doing impossible, that is where a lot of the pieces are. So I think that would be more of an educational nuts and bolts conversation.
Yes.
It's definitely happening. It's not as much in the big picture ways that you might think, because there, again, we're able to do some bubble insulation, a little bubble wrap to our community here.
Yeah.
But there are certainly a lot of details that add up that just make the larger enterprise of higher education a lot more difficult, or education really at any level, I think.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, I think, in general, I mean, even my work, at Indiana University, watching what's happened even here at Emory. I mean, everybody's navigating it in some way, shape, or form.
And we need to not over navigate. Like earlier you said, DEI, these words we're not supposed to say.
Yeah.
It was never illegal. And a lot of those things were things that were overturned. So actually we can, and we should, because that's a place where many are proactively censoring themselves in ways that don't need to happen.
For sure.
And it's, and it's interesting, again, because I'm across different parts of the education sector, the place where you still see a lot of equity and inclusion administrative roles, both existing and advertised, is in independent high schools.
Yeah.
All sorts of, many private schools are still doing those roles, and it doesn't seem to look any different, at least in terms of the numbers. So, and again, they don't have the federal aid tied to it.
Right.
So, everyone has to navigate their situation, but I caution all of us, including myself, not to over censor
for sure
on something that actually we can still say, because we can contribute to that too, right?
No, we can. And I think our internalized issues, like, and maybe some of our past traumas and stuff, to your point, we're probably too quick to, okay, I'm not going to say that word. It's been interesting for me, even as a speaker, when I get asked to speak at schools or at companies, and in the pre-work, the meetings that we have, to talk about, okay, well, what are the goals of this meeting? And, there's obviously many different versions of speeches that I can give depending on the audience and depending on the desires of that particular event. And I think, I mean, I probably self-edit more than I should, and I'll be like, okay, well, we'll use belonging and inclusion, or we'll use community. We'll use these other words, which are important words too. It's not, they're not important words, but.
Well, and that's both, for you and I, these gay white guys from the Midwest of a certain era and a certain age, right? Like, those were both self-care strategies, but also kind of strategies towards comfort, and we need to push ourselves because we are in positions to be less comfortable, and so that's something I think to be really mindful of.
It's one of the things I love about your program. You and I talked about this, is the word queer, right? And for people of a certain age and generation, that was one of the most hateful words used against us. I mean, the bullies used that word. We went through this when we were naming the philanthropy circle at Indiana University, which is the queer philanthropy circle. And we had people say, I'm not going to join it if it's called the queer philanthropy. Like, they wanted it to be the LGBTQ plus philanthropy circle, or all those kind of things. And I had been to your campus, which reinforced it. The student group on Indiana's campus called themselves the Queer Student Union. And when I asked them how they chose that word, they knew the history of the word queer, but they had taken it back. Like, they're like, we're going to own it. And with all the different identities in our community and all the different letters of identity and the colors in the flag and everything, they felt queer was the most comprehensive word for their group. I love that, and brought that back, quote, to the adults and the donors, and said, like, again, out of the mouths of babes, out of the mouths of children, listen to their reasoning on why they took the word queer. And we took it back. But I probably have that conversation, John, 5 or 6 times a year with different donors on, they're not comfortable with that word. And it's because it was used so horribly against us for so long.
Yeah. There is also, in terms of queer leadership, another intentionality, I think, with that name, because we are positing that leadership is different in some way by virtue of being LGBTQ plus. So yes, I think that I can recall just myself, in the sort of era when I was coming out in the 1990s, there was a lot of emphasis to show we're just like everybody else. We're actually not that different. And there were reasons why that made sense at the time.
Right.
I think now there's more of a, actually, we're not that similar to everybody, right? There are things that are celebrated and different. And I want leadership to look different by virtue of having more LGBTQ plus people at the table. If we don't change it at all, if it just still looks like regular old leadership, then we don't actually need a BQLP. So we are trying to think about what does it mean to queer leadership in some of the ways that it used verbally.
Well, and I love that you guys are doing scholarly academic work on this and research, and because I often get asked, not necessarily at your event, but I often get asked, do you think you were successful? Like in some way, shape, or form, I'll get the question, like basically being a queer leader, do you think that made you successful? And my answer back is, I don't know, because that's who I am, right? Yes, that first job out of college, that first 2.5 years, I was, quote, acting like a straight leader. They were also the most miserable part of my entire career. So, but since then, and you guys have done so much research on this, you and Carla are academics about it, and the other people you work with. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe it made me successful. I don't think anybody gave me the job because I was queer. You know what I mean by that, John? It's not like, oh, we'll hire him because he is queer. But I think overall, when I look back at what people say about me when they worked with me, I may have been exhibiting different skills and strengths and a different toolkit because I was queer. So things like compassion and empathy and active listening and things like that. I don't know, maybe, but it's the only way I am. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and one of the examples I talk about, because of course we do your material in our courses, so I'm sometimes teaching Jim Fielding as a subject. I do often talk about that superpower of reading the room and being really aware of who people are, and how that originates from a queer survival strategy. 100%. But it's great as a leader if you can read the room, because leaders who don't read the room, other people who do come in and say, well, they just totally missed that.
Well, or they call them tone deaf or whatever. Completely.
So I do think there's certainly, it's going to be qualities that maybe are more likely to emerge in someone who's queer than someone who isn't, which is not to say that every queer person reads the room, because that's certainly not true.
Right.
It's certainly going to be the case that there are people who are not queer who read the room really well also.
No, completely.
But it's sort of that preponderance.
No, I think you're right. I love that example of the reading the room, because again, I think that's why I'm good at team building and culture building and meeting dynamics, because I run meetings in rooms with multiple people in the room and make sure that I'm including everybody in the room because of that lived experience, because of that wisdom that comes from it. But I think it's so fascinating.
And it's impossible to say how each of us would have led if we had not been who we are. Right. I mean, I mean, I feel like I fought my whole life. You know this, John. I feel like I fought my whole life to kind of get where I am today, which is the most authentic version of myself. Right. And it took me too long. It took me till I was in my 50s to really become the most authentic version of myself. My driver now, what really gets me going in the morning and when I wake up, is I want to help people get to that realization earlier, because I want people to get there in their 20s and their 30s and their teens if they can get there, because I know the amount of anxiety and the amount of angst and the amount of therapy and the amount of missteps. And I think we all have to make missteps, but I know I often do wonder if my path would have been different if I could have embraced my full authenticity earlier.
I don't live with regrets. I'm not saying that, but I think I do think my path, my journey might have looked a little bit different, personally and professionally. I mean, but again, I'm living the life. I'm a believer in fate. I'm a believer in everything happens for a reason. So I'm living the life I was meant to live, for sure. But I do wonder if I had found BQLP earlier in life, if I think it would have been interesting.
Well, and when you were talking about your story of going to the private school at that point, this is one of those, and maybe, if Jim Fielding had received the Simons Rock postcard then and convinced his parents to let him go, what would have happened? I was with an alum recently, and I mentioned that I got my first piece of college mail was from Simons Rock. I remember thinking, I don't know who would go here. Right. I wasn't needing it then. I needed it as an adult, actually. I think as a professor, it was the perfect fit for me. But the alum posed the question of, wow, it's interesting to think about what's the alternative reality if John Weinstein had actually gone to Simons Rock. He's like, would you be the provost? Would you have become something else? Like, this is the path where we are. But I thought that's an interesting question. Like, how would it have been different if I had actually gone and not 30?
It's an interesting thesis. I mean, and by the way, there's two of my favorite movies of all time, Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow and Adjustment Bureau with Matt Damon and Emily Blunt. Not huge Oscar winners, not huge movies, worth people watching though. Deal with this. They deal with, it's, also one of my favorite poems is the Robert Frost poem, two paths diverge in the woods. And, I took one, I'm way paraphrasing. But those movies deal with this very issue of like, what happened if you had gone left instead of gone right? Right? What happens if you had what happens if my parents would have said yes in 1981, I guess it was, and said, yes, you can go to Maumee Valley Country Day School. How different would I have looked than the fact that I stuck it out at Whitmer for 2 more years and graduated from there and then went on to Indiana University? I might not have even gone to Indiana University if I'd gone to Maumee Valley Country Day School. I don't know, right? And I don't want to go back and relive it. I'm not asking for a magic wand or anything, but I do think there are those kind of pivotal, seminal moments in our lives, and that's what both of those movies deal with. And
there's also the sense of timing, because this is something that I've actually thought about. I've been thinking a lot about patriotism in this current political climate.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about how do we reclaim patriotism as a queer element? Because look at me, I'm the child of, descendants of immigrants from 2 totally different places.
Yes.
So there's, not only in the United States, but the United States is certainly the most likely place in the past decades where someone would be born, right, to that heritage. So my existence at all kind of comes from America and what it's been.
Yes.
And my life ended up timing pretty well with the queer liberation movement. For me, because I was in Massachusetts, gay marriage came really fast in my lifetime. I mean, I was, got married at 34. There are a lot of things in my life that have happened because of the United States.
Yes.
So I don't want to let patriotism be taken by somebody else.
Totally.
And be not accessible. But like, how do we think of queerness intersecting with that? I don't have the answers, and there's a lot of challenges to this argument.
We need another episode.
Because I also think that's going to be a path towards us getting back into kind of the dominance of the political views, right? We're for so much the other, we can't take center stage, and I think that's something that we really need to do. So that's one of the cool leadership projects I'm thinking about. What does it mean to be
that one? I love that. I mean, the words. This is where you and I are friends. I've been thinking a lot about participative democracy, what participative democracy means, which I think is tied to what you're talking about too, because the one thing, and I don't know, maybe it's part of my queerness, is I have never played the victim, and I actually don't like people that play the victim, right? And so, but I know in a democracy that means we're not always going to win, right? We're not like your candidate, your cause, your mission that's living in a participative democracy. But the part that I've added to it is really spending time defining what participation looks like, because I'm still very concerned as a former political science major at the amount of people who, eligible vote, the percentage of people who are eligible to vote who don't vote, right? And think that some of it are doing it as a protest, but I think many people are just doing it because they think their vote doesn't count. But I live now in a state in Georgia where you can look at how close our elections have been lately, where I feel my vote. Quite honestly, I feel my vote here more than I felt my vote in California. I think California being so huge and for the most part being Democratic, you didn't feel your vote as much. Here in Atlanta, I feel it. And we have runoff elections and people win by 300 votes and 400 votes for city council seats and all that kind of stuff. And it really makes a difference.
Well, and here, in this new location in Barrytown, as part of the larger Bard campus, we are in a congressional swing district. Very much. This is a district that goes different ways in different elections. So,
right.
Now, because for me, a lot of my students are not yet 18, but for those who are, we actually kind of did relocate. We relocated a kind of lefty college into a swing district.
Yeah. Well, but in a weird way, you're teaching. You're teaching civics. I say that all the time. It's like you're teaching civics. All right, we're running out of time. I'm watching our time, but I have one final question for you that I ask all of my guests, because again, the theme of the podcast is ask for an answer, and you've given tons of great answers and tons of things to think about. But what is one question I should have asked you that I didn't ask you? What do you wish I would have asked you that I didn't ask you?
I'm going to slightly flip it, because there's one that I would have wished you had asked me so that I could tell you why it's not the question in education. People love to ask educators, what's the one thing you'd like to change that would solve education?
Okay.
And
I didn't.
You didn't. So good for you there. And what I would say when someone asks me that is that it's not one thing. And we need to stop looking for this silver bullet. That's the one thing that we do. The challenges in education are multiple, and the things we need to solve to do that have to work in concert with each other. Mm-hmm. You need to change aspects of community engagement, aspects of perception of education. For students, you need to help them build different skills. We need to work on their needs. We need to create the environment. Mm-hmm. There are so many things we need to do that in spending the time wanting that question, it's not just one thing to fix, and the solution isn't going to happen tomorrow. As educators, you don't really get to know if you did your work well until 10 or 20 years later. It's great as a 25-year educator to now have students who are in their 40s. Yes. And I get to see where it went.
Yes.
And we're often asking educators to, do one thing to solve everything so we see new results tomorrow. That's never going to be what we're going to see. Right now, some of the federal legislation that's trying to have colleges prove how much money students make 1 to 2 years after graduation.
Yeah.
That's too soon a time frame for everything.
Yeah.
So it's never going to be one thing. It's really that in education, you always have to take it from many different angles and look at many different questions and many different answers. And that's how we're going to move education over multiple generations, right? When I was in Newark and there were a lot of struggles with intergenerational poverty, I would say we're not going to solve this in one generation.
Yes.
I wanted to create a school where my students would then be able to help their children navigate through school and college better than previous generations. If it's an intergenerational problem, you need an intergenerational solution. And that's what we really need to do as educators.
Brilliant. John, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all that you do for the world, not just our LGBTQ community, but again, happy Pride, because this is a Pride episode. I can't wait to see where this goes. I love that you ended talking about legacy, because I know the legacy that you're building. I could see it. I saw it in real time. I know you're saying you'll see it in 10 or 20 years. I felt it in real time. So thank you. And I'm here to support any of the work that you guys are doing. I already told you I need you in the next book. So we'll be in touch. Thank
you
you
so much, Jim,
Yeah.
for creating this space and all the spaces you create. And it's just such a great pleasure to be here, and happy Pride.
Thank you. Thanks for spending this time with us on Ask for an Answer. If this conversation sparks something for you, don't just nod and move on. Take one idea, one question, one uncomfortable and bring it into your next meeting, your next one-on-one, or your next big decision. That's how this becomes a practice, not just a podcast. If you're leading a team, a classroom, a company, or just your own next chapter, you don't have to have it all figured out. You do have to be willing to listen, to ask better questions, and to create the kind of safety where people will actually tell you what they see. If this episode was useful, share it with someone who's in the arena with you. And if you want more tools, stories, and real talk leadership moments, make sure you follow the show and leave a review so others can find us. I'm Jim Fielding. Thank you for being here, for leading with less armor and more intention. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep asking for an answer.